All right. As Jennifer said, I'm Darwin Bender, and I'm a Park Contracts Administrator with SaskPower. I don't know if any of you have read my biography, but I was raised on a farm near a small town in Saskatchewan. I moved to Regina after completing my grade 12 and being offered a position with SaskPower. As a family, we rarely visited Regina, and knowing where and finding accessible living facilities was difficult. A resource was people and counselors I had met a year earlier when I was in West Canada Rehabilitation Center after a motor vehicle accident. After moving and getting settled, and the next thing was, okay, how do I get around this big city? Particularly getting to work. During my first year of work, I commuted on a Regina special needs bus. We refer to them as a bunny bus. So while working, I found out SaskPower had designated spots for persons with disabilities. So I applied and was listed until one became available. SaskPower has about 2,500 employees, of whom belong to one of two unions or our management employees. So to back up how I got there, while I was completing my grade 12, I needed to decide if I was going to find a job or continue my education. Although I had applied and was accepted at SciAst, which is a local college in Saskatchewan, I had submitted resumes and completed applications with various Saskatchewan Crown corporations. Submitting these applications and resumes was the advice from a counselor, again, who I had met in my rehab days. I was at this time I found out that SaskPower had an affirmative action plan. The recruiting department responsible for affirmative action had a budget for 7 staff and was full at the time that I had applied. If you're not aware of the affirmative action, it's similar to a temporary job. Individuals with disabilities were hired for selected positions based on their skills and abilities and education requirements. Well, I am thankful for the affirmative action. 25 years ago, I received a call from the employee in charge of the affirmative action department offering me a job. It was a clerk 1 position in the accounts payable department, where I would be opening and stamping mail. Today, I am a Power Contracts Administrator in the Transmission Service Department for the Transmission and Distribution Business Unit. A little bit of background maybe as to what that position is. It's accounting related, administration related. I work with agreements and doing up decision items and that sort of thing for executives, and it's interesting and challenging at the same time. So how did I get there, you ask? Well, the requirements for the Clerk 1 position were a completion of grade 10. Today, the position is automated, and they replaced my date stamp and felt ink pad with electronic date stamper and scanning of invoices and all those wonderful technologies. Earlier, I had mentioned the affirmative action had a budget for hiring people on a temporary basis, if you will. After people were hired, they were encouraged and expected to apply for posted jobs and compete in the bidding process that unions in workplaces have, for those of you that are familiar with that. After 14 months, I was successful at obtaining a permanent position. Next, I wanted different and more challenging responsibilities and higher paying positions in accounts payable, and then I wanted experience in other departments. In order to achieve and fulfill some of these wants and goals, I needed to further my education. I had applied for an education leave. As a result, I completed my accounting diploma through SciAst. Through the bidding process, I was a successful candidate and achieved other positions in accounts payable. I had also substituted into other positions within the corporate finance and support business unit. I have been involved with corporate-wide projects. Prior to bidding into management, I served as a union chairperson on the SaskPower Diversity Committee, as well as union shop steward. Currently, in addition to my paid duties, I am a co-founder and co-chair of NED. It's an affinity group, Network of Employees for Disabilities. Again, like I said, is an affinity group of the SaskPower Joint Union Management Diversity Committee. My experience for job accommodations has been positive. Although I don't require assistive devices at this time to complete my tasks, SaskPower, to my knowledge, is open to acquiring what may be needed on an individual basis. For example, I am aware of individuals receiving hearing assistive devices for their jobs and when attending meetings. I am also aware that employers think it may be costly to hire someone with a disability. So when I have the opportunity, I share with them that they may also save money. For example, I don't require an office chair. I bring my own. For me, accommodations are more of a physical nature, like automatic doorways, accessible lighting, switches, plugins with extension cords, because in most office settings, the electrical boxes are under the desk. So if they have an extension cord that brings it out a little bit farther, then I can reach it. The computer itself is on top of the desk, so I can reach, the disk drive, the power on off switch, that sort of thing. What I have found works best for me is after having been offered a job, accepted, and the start date is determined and all that kind of stuff, I say to the hiring person that I would like a tour of the new work location prior to the starting date to see if any and what changes may be needed to be arranged. What works best for your schedule. I find this is an icebreaker, and it lets the other person know that it is okay to talk about things. And, changes may be required, may not. As for ergonomic assessments, SaskPower does this for all employees, so I believe this is not a specific accommodation. I have a story about that. A while back, in another department that I was working, we had brought in an outside person or professional person to go around and complete workstation ergonomics assessments. And in following their steps to set up the workstations, the height for the placement of the keyboard and the distance from the components and all that sort of thing, I was able to share with a person that their process and techniques were not always accommodating or correct. As a person who uses a wheelchair, the height is determined by what I'm able to roll under. So that doesn't necessarily mean that the keyboard is at the right height, which also affects the height of the monitor. Yeah, you can raise a monitor, but you can't lower the monitor. So after we went through my ergonomic assessment and found that not everything that they were saying was perfect, the professional left with the advice of do what works best for you and try to remember to sit with good posture. So, I find educating employees and departments about people with disabilities works best over coffee and conversation while at work in your work stations. I recently moved to another job, which is in another building. I'm sure some of you may have experienced this, in that you can tell, I recently moved to another work location, and you can tell when you meet in the coffee room that their wheels are just turning and they're wondering, why is he in a chair? Well, I allow them to ponder for a while. Not only because I think it's a little bit amusing, but I think it's also for them to ponder. Then as we get to know one another, conversations move to talking about why I use a wheelchair. I find by waiting for a while, people are open to listening and learning versus the feel sorry and the sympathy. It is important to go to common areas for lunch or coffee and get to know people aside from sitting at a workstation. By moving around and going to common areas, you see and meet people. This builds networks and it builds support groups. The affinity group, NED, Network of Employees for Disabilities, at SaskPower also does lunch and learns where different presenters are brought in for a lunch hour to talk about different disabilities. While this provides an understanding and awareness from the various disabilities, hanging out with people and getting involved is the best approach. Some barriers I see. In the workplace, and particularly in some departments, employees with physical or visible disabilities versus the invisible disabilities tend to experience more obstacles at work. The reason for this may be linked to other people's perceptions. You see, when people are willing to take the time to learn a little about an employee, they tend to make assumptions about what an employee with a visible disability can and can't do. In this one particular instance, I had the full support of coworkers who were encouraging me to apply for a higher level position. Based upon past hiring practices for the position, I met the skill and education requirements for the job. I also had the full support of the employees that worked in the area. To ensure that I wanted the position, I made arrangements with the support of my coworkers to acquire a realistic preview of the job. My intention was to determine if I was prepared for the demands of the position and the hours of work. After the job preview, I applied for the position, but was unsuccessful. You see, there are times, despite the support of coworkers and the initiative being taken by the employee, that people in positions of power will determine what is best for employees with disabilities. I feel that this is because of the manager's own biases and fears and his inability to see past the chair. The reasons provided were not sound or even valid. Having had that experience, I encourage you not to get discouraged, to keep applying, and to remember that perceptions are just perceptions. Sometimes only you and those who work closely with you will value you for what you have to offer in employment. A couple of the other barriers that I'll just mention and not really get into, there's in departments you have team building, and sometimes those team building events need to happen and will happen outside of the workplace, which is good. But you need to be aware that sometimes, for me, for example, golfing isn't always one that includes you as a part of the team. And there's also one of the other barriers that I've came across is sometimes they kind of want you as a poster child or tokenism because you're in a chair. So just be careful. I mean, you make your choices in what you want to do. I believe getting involved in internal networks, if employers have them, is key. I know our affinity group, the bonds between employees are strong, and a friendship has developed as a result of working relationships. In closing, building a network in the community and workplace of people who get it is key. As people with disabilities, we are able to know who those people are, and it's important that we network and stick with them. Once you've become established and know the systems and the culture of the workplace, make an effort to share your knowledge with new and other employees with disabilities. This is important in creating positive change in the workplace.